The lights of Georgetown's grand auditorium were bright, unforgiving, illuminating every sneer and every glance. Cameras panned across the stage where Senator Tommy Tuberville leaned back in his chair, a smirk curling at the edge of his lips. The microphone in front of him hissed for a moment before he leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," he chuckled, almost as if he were addressing a punchline rather than a colleague, "you honestly expect anyone to take you seriously? Your arguments are laughable." The room broke with scattered, nervous laughter, more out of discomfort than agreement. Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes, steady and sharp, stayed fixed on Tuberville. She had heard this tone before, the dismissive laugh, the sneering doubt, the casual attempt to reduce a woman's authority to entertainment. Tuberville leaned back again, shaking his head as if her very presence was some kind of absurdity. "You're not cut from the cloth of leadership," he added, his Alabama drawl emphasizing every syllable like a hammer. "You're unfit." Gasps rippled across the audience. Some shifted in their seats, uneasy at the naked disrespect. Others reached for their phones, already sensing that something unforgettable was unfolding. Crockett's lips curved ever so slightly, not in anger, not in surrender, but in something quieter. Something more dangerous. The silence after his words stretched longer than expected, hanging over the crowd like storm clouds just before a downpour. Every camera zoomed in closer. Tuberville, perhaps emboldened by the hush, laughed again, his shoulders bouncing in mock amusement. He thought he had won the moment, thought his dismissal would land like a final blow. But Crockett was not rattled. She moved slowly, deliberately, her hand reaching toward the folder in front of her. The room seemed to lean forward with her. She opened it, fingers brushing across pages, then paused, not at the papers but at something folded, worn, and reverent. She held it for just a second, as though summoning its weight. And then, with her voice calm, low, and unshaken, she said, "Senator, there's something you haven't read." Every head turned. Every whisper died. The cameras sharpened their focus. Because no one in that room, not Tuberville, not the crowd, not even those watching at home, was ready for what she was about to reveal next. The sting of Tuberville's laugh was more than just one man mocking one woman. It echoed with a history too familiar in American politics. A history where power tried to define who was worthy of leadership and who wasn't. In that single word, unfit, Tuberville wasn't simply dismissing Jasmine Crockett. He was calling into question the dignity of women in politics, the resilience of people of color in power, and the right of every voice to be heard in a democracy that promises equality. This clash wasn't happening in a vacuum. It unfolded at a time when America was asking itself difficult questions. Whose stories matter? Whose sacrifices are remembered? Who gets to claim the mantle of patriotism? Tuberville's laugh was meant to silence, to reduce Crockett to a caricature. But in that silence, millions watching could see themselves, their struggles, their parents' struggles, their community sacrifices, hanging in the balance. Crockett had not walked onto that stage as just another politician. She carried with her the weight of generational resilience, the lived reality of fighting uphill battles in rooms designed to shut her out. For many in the crowd, Tuberville's dismissal was not shocking, it was predictable. That was precisely why it mattered so much. The stakes of this confrontation stretched beyond partisan lines or legislative debates. This was about dignity versus arrogance, truth versus entitlement. Tuberville's arrogance leaned on privilege and mockery, assuming the room would side with power, not principle. Crockett's composure, by contrast, represented the steady conviction that leadership is measured not by who laughs the loudest, but by who stands the tallest when it counts. For those in the audience, it was impossible to ignore the symbolism. Here was a senator whose confidence was inherited from entrenched power, using it to belittle. And here was a congresswoman whose strength was forged through persistence, preparing to answer not with volume but with proof. It was America's conflict distilled into a single exchange, the old guard of dismissal versus the new guard of determination. Even those following online could sense it. Tweets flew in real time calling out the imbalance. Clips of Tuberville's laugh began circulating before the exchange was even over, tagged with words like arrogance and condescension. Viewers saw not just an insult but a line being drawn in the sand. Because this wasn't just about whether one senator respected one congresswoman. It was about whether America respected itself enough to uphold its own ideals. Every clash like this becomes a referendum. Will dignity win or will arrogance go unchallenged? And that was why Crockett's calm, deliberate hand reaching for that folded letter carried so much electricity. It wasn't just paper. It was legacy. It was sacrifice. It was proof that dignity carries receipts. The audience could feel it, the air tightening, the sense that something far larger than words was about to crash down in that chamber. Tuberville had laughed as though the story ended with his dismissal. What he didn't know was that the story was only beginning. But the deeper story goes beyond the room that day. Tommy Tuberville did not stumble into power. He inherited its trappings long before he ever set foot in the Senate. His rise was less about grit and sacrifice, and more about the privileges afforded to those who fit a particular mold. White, male, wealthy, insulated. His career began not in public service but on the sidelines of football fields, where his bluster became his brand. Winning was measured not in nuance or principle but in domination. And when he carried that persona into politics, the results were predictable. A man who saw governance as another arena for showboating. Tuberville often presented himself as a champion of real America, yet his record told a different story. He spoke endlessly of respect for the military, yet infamously held up hundreds of military promotions for months, turning the careers of service members into bargaining chips for his political games. He railed against coastal elites while cashing donor checks at high-dollar galas. He preached about family values while aligning himself with movements steeped in division and resentment. What made him dangerous in debates wasn't his intellect, it was his arrogance. He thrived on performance, leaning into his role as the smirking antagonist who seemed untouchable. His dismissive chuckles, his mocking tone, his quickness to brand others as unworthy, all were tools he used to project dominance. Yet beneath that veneer of confidence lay something more fragile, a man terrified of being unmasked. For Tuberville, confrontation wasn't about ideas. It was about power. He laughed not because Crockett's words were funny, but because laughter was a weapon, an attempt to diminish her before she could diminish him. His smirk wasn't amusement, it was armor. But armor has cracks, and arrogance is often the first sign of weakness. Consider the contradictions. A man who mocked Crockett for being unfit, while his own political resume was paper-thin, lacking the kind of legislative accomplishments that define real leadership. A man who sneered at her credentials while stumbling through basic questions about governance, exposed repeatedly for not knowing the structures of the very government he served. His confidence was a performance built on shaky ground, and anyone paying attention could see it wobble. His fragility showed most in moments of exposure. When pressed for details, he dodged. When confronted with facts, he deflected. When cornered, he fell back on ridicule, hoping the spectacle of his arrogance would distract from the emptiness of his answers. And in this, Tuberville was not just one man, he was the embodiment of a wider pattern in politics. Those who rise on privilege mistake that privilege for merit and crumble when asked to prove otherwise. For Crockett, Tuberville's arrogance was not new. Women in politics, particularly women of color, had faced this posture for decades. The laugh, the sneer, the insinuation that their presence was charity rather than earned respect. Tuberville simply played the role louder, with less subtlety, and in front of cameras eager to catch every condescending grin. And yet, that very arrogance is what sets up the drama. Villains who believe themselves invincible never prepare for the counterpunch. They underestimate. They dismiss. They laugh. Tuberville's laughter was not just offensive, it was a confession. A confession that he believed the moment belonged to him, that Crockett would wither under his gaze, that the audience would side with power over principle. But arrogance always carries the seeds of its own undoing. The louder the mockery, the harder the fall when truth steps in. And Tuberville, despite his smirk, despite his swagger, was standing at the edge of that fall. Yet arrogance always cracks when confronted with truth. Jasmine Crockett's path to that stage was not carved by privilege or shortcuts. It was built from the ground up, step by deliberate step, forged in the fire of struggle, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief that voices like hers mattered in America. If Tuberville represented the ease of inherited advantage, Crockett embodied the grind of earning every inch of respect in a world eager to deny it. She grew up in a household where dignity was not optional, it was survival. Her parents, like so many black families in America, carried the weight of generational struggle. They instilled in her the lessons of resilience, of never folding in the face of ridicule, and of standing tall even when the odds tilted cruelly against you. For Crockett, education was not just a pathway, it was a lifeline. She clawed her way through classrooms where she was underestimated, outworked those who doubted her, and earned credentials that would later silence even her loudest critics. But success did not insulate her from hardship. As a young lawyer, Crockett built her career on defending those most overlooked. Families fighting eviction, workers battling exploitation, communities dismissed as expendable. The cases she took on were not glamorous. They didn't earn headlines or applause. They earned sleepless nights, meager paychecks, and the satisfaction of knowing that someone, somewhere, had a voice because she had refused to be silent. Her rise into politics was not inevitable, it was improbable. She wasn't the candidate big donors courted. She wasn't the polished insider groomed for photo ops. She was the one knocking doors, organizing neighbors, convincing people who had long lost faith in politics that their voices mattered. Every victory she earned came not from being handed a stage, but from building one brick by brick, with calloused hands and relentless determination. And there was another layer, one deeper, more personal. Crockett carried with her the stories of identity and pride, the pride of a community that knew what it meant to be marginalized, dismissed, and underestimated. Her very presence in the halls of Congress was a testament to that pride. To every child told their name was too ethnic, every woman told to tone it down, every immigrant family told they didn't belong, Crockett stood as living proof that belonging was not granted by those in power. It was seized by those who refused to bow. The sacrifices along the way were not invisible. Friends recalled how she would stretch meals to make sure campaign volunteers were fed, how she would drive hours across districts when she could barely afford gas, how she kept pushing even when exhaustion whispered that it would be easier to quit. But quitting was never in her vocabulary. Quitting would have meant validating every smirk, every sneer, every dismissal she had endured. And she had endured plenty. Again and again, Crockett faced men who thought they could laugh her out of the room, who mistook her calm for weakness, who believed their titles entitled them to dominance. And again she proved them wrong, not with theatrics but with facts, composure, and an unshakable sense of purpose. That is why the confrontation with Tuberville mattered so deeply. To the casual observer it might have looked like one more political spat. But to those who knew Crockett's journey, it was the latest chapter in a much longer story. She had been underestimated before. She had been laughed at before. And each time she had turned dismissal into determination, mockery into momentum. Her rise was not just personal, it was symbolic. It was a declaration that leadership in America does not belong to the entitled few but to the resilient many. It was proof that dignity can outlast derision, that truth can outshine arrogance. And it was a reminder that for every Tuberville who sneers, there is a Crockett who refuses to shrink. So when Tuberville laughed, when he leaned into that microphone and called her unfit, Crockett did not hear words meant for her alone. She heard echoes of every barrier she had broken, every fight she had won, every ancestor who had refused to be silenced. And she knew this was not the moment to simply respond. It was the moment to reveal. Because unlike in the past, when arrogance was answered with grit and silence with perseverance, this time she carried something more. Something undeniable. Something that would turn laughter into stunned silence. This time they came armed with receipts. The auditorium was electric, 1,000 eyes flickering between Tuberville's swagger and Crockett's composure. The clash had already made people lean forward, but what happened next transformed it from a tense exchange into a full-scale showdown. Tuberville, sensing the moment slipping, decided to double down. He leaned forward again, microphone catching his voice as he declared with exaggerated bravado, "This is what's wrong with Washington. We've got folks like you, loud, emotional, unqualified, pretending you're leaders. But the American people know better. They know who's fit to lead and who's just here for the show." Gasps rolled through the room. His words dripped not just with insult but with entitlement, as though he alone held the authority to declare who belonged and who didn't. A smirk stretched across his face as he glanced at the cameras, clearly playing not just to the room but to his base at home. Crockett didn't blink. She sat upright, eyes steady, her hands resting gently on the table in front of her. Not clenched in anger. Not trembling in frustration. Just steady. The contrast was striking. One man red-faced, voice rising, throwing barbs like darts at a board. One woman still, calm, her silence louder than his mockery. Tuberville mistook that calm for weakness. He raised his hand, gesturing toward her with the arrogance of a man convinced he had the crowd. "Tell me, Congresswoman, what have you ever done that makes you think you're ready for this? What sacrifices have you made? What experience do you have besides playing politics with identity?" The line stung, not because it was true, but because it carried the familiar dismissal that women, people of color, and marginalized voices have faced for generations. The insinuation that their worth is nothing more than a performance. His voice boomed through the microphones, feeding on his own condescension. But Crockett, unshaken, finally leaned in. Her voice was soft but firm, each word measured like a note in a symphony. "Senator, arrogance isn't experience. And mocking sacrifice doesn't erase it. A ripple of murmurs spread across the crowd. Tuberville's smirk faltered just slightly. The cameras caught it, a flicker of doubt quickly hidden behind his trademark laugh. "Cute line," he sneered, forcing his grin back into place. "But lines don't make you a leader." Crockett tilted her head, almost in pity. Her silence after his jab stretched just long enough to turn discomfort into anticipation. People in the audience leaned closer, their breaths caught, waiting for what would come next. Tuberville tried to fill the silence again, fumbling for dominance. "This isn't a debate stage for rehearsed speeches. This is real leadership. And you just don't have it." That was when Crockett moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached down, not for a piece of paper this time but for her phone. The gesture was so calm, so unhurried, that the audience didn't immediately grasp its meaning. But the cameras did. They zoomed in on the motion, capturing the exact second the dynamic shifted. Tuberville paused mid-sentence, eyes narrowing as if he suddenly sensed danger. Crockett didn't look at him. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at her phone, her expression unreadable, as if she held in her hand not just a device but a detonator. The room fell into a heavy hush. The insults, the laughter, the bravado, all evaporated in the weight of anticipation. Something was coming, something more powerful than retorts or rhetoric. And in that silence, Crockett finally lifted her eyes, her voice calm as ever. "You want to talk about sacrifice, Senator? Let's talk about it." The crowd tensed, breath held. Tuberville opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time all evening, he had no words. Then came the moment replayed millions of times. The air in the room felt charged as though every molecule carried static. Crockett held her phone steady in her hand, her gaze unwavering, her silence deliberate. For a full 5 seconds she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The anticipation itself became her weapon. Tuberville leaned back in his chair, laughing again, though this time it sounded thinner, less assured. "What, Congresswoman, you gonna read me a tweet? Is that the best you've got?" His chuckle scattered across the microphones, but it didn't land with the same confidence as before. His laugh, once smug, now carried a trace of nervousness, as though he sensed something was slipping beyond his control. Crockett finally spoke, her voice smooth and unhurried. "No, Senator. I'm not here to read tweets. I'm here to play your words. Your real words." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Journalists scrambled, hands flying across keyboards. Camera operators leaned closer, adjusting lenses to catch every frame. The audience knew instinctively that this was not just a counterpunch. It was the moment that would define the night. She unlocked her phone with a quick swipe and tapped a file. The microphone picked up a faint click, followed by a sudden burst of audio. "I don't care about those people. They'll vote how we tell them. Half of them don't even know what we're voting on anyway." The voice was unmistakable. Tuberville's. Gasps filled the room like thunder. The crowd shifted as if jolted by a live wire. Tuberville's face froze, the color draining from his cheeks before rushing back in a flush of red. He leaned toward his mic, stammering, "That's out of context. That's..." But Crockett didn't flinch. She let the recording play on. "And if the military has to wait, so be it. We're not here for them. We're here for us." This time the gasp was louder, followed by a chorus of shocked whispers. A veteran in the audience could be seen shaking his head, lips pressed tight in anger. The camera zoomed in on Tuberville's hands gripping the desk, knuckles white, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. Crockett leaned back, eyes fixed on him, saying nothing. Her silence was more damning than any words she could have spoken. Tuberville fumbled. "That's fake. This is some kind of..." His voice cracked slightly. He coughed, tried again, louder. "Anyone can edit audio these days." But his laugh didn't return. The swagger was gone. Crockett calmly set her phone down on the table, the recording still audible. "Senator, those are your words. And for the record, this was taken during your own fundraiser, less than 6 months ago." The crowd reacted like a wave crashing against rocks. Phones shot up into the air, recording, streaming live, capturing every second. Hashtags were already being born in real time. The audio continued. "America doesn't need to know everything. They just need to believe what we tell them." And with that final line, the room erupted. Some in the audience booed. Others shouted. A few stood in shock, hands over their mouths. Tuberville's head dropped, his smirk finally shattered. Crockett finally leaned in again, her voice steady as steel. "This is leadership? Mocking service members, dismissing the people you swore to represent, treating democracy like a game? And yet you sit there and laugh at me?" Tuberville tried to respond, but the words tangled in his throat. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted his microphone. "This is political theater," he sputtered, "a smear campaign." But no one was buying it. His laugh had vanished, his confidence cracked. The audience wasn't seeing a leader, they were seeing a man exposed. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply let the evidence hang in the air, undeniable and unshakable. "Senator, leadership is sacrifice. Leadership is service. Leadership is truth. And tonight, America sees the difference." The silence after her words was deafening. The cameras caught every flicker of emotion on Tuberville's face: defensiveness, anger, fear, desperation. The contrast could not have been sharper. One figure calm, resolute, embodying dignity, the other unraveling under the weight of his own words. It felt like a courtroom, the kind where the jury doesn't even need to deliberate. The evidence was clear, the verdict already decided. Tuberville had been undone, not by rumor or rhetoric, but by his own voice, his own admissions, his own arrogance turned against him. And yet, what made the moment unforgettable wasn't just the exposure of hypocrisy. It was the composure with which Crockett delivered it. No theatrics. No shouting. Just the quiet, devastating certainty of truth. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, swelling into a roar of disbelief and indignation. Commentators whispered to each other off mic. Producers in newsrooms across the country leaned forward, shouting at interns to clip this. Clip this now. The viral moment had been born right before their eyes. Tuberville sat back, his face a storm of fury and humiliation. His laugh was gone. His swagger gone. His armor shattered. And Crockett, still calm, still composed, placed her phone neatly on the table as if to say, "The evidence speaks for itself." The cameras didn't cut away. They lingered, savoring the contrast, capturing the fall of arrogance and the rise of dignity in real time. And for those watching at home, it was the moment they would replay, share, dissect, and meme for days to come. Because the arrogance that had seemed untouchable just minutes before had been pierced by one simple, undeniable act: pressing play. The room buzzed with electricity, the ripple already expanding far beyond the walls of Georgetown. Social media feeds were lighting up. Hashtags were climbing. Commentators were preparing their soundbites. The moment had detonated, and the aftershocks were only beginning. The internet did not wait a single second. The recording had barely finished echoing through the hall before the first clips hit Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Within minutes, the moment was everywhere. The audio of Tuberville's words, smug, dismissive, dripping with contempt, looped endlessly over slow-motion zoom-ins of his reddened face. The caption, "Leadership," appeared in bold block letters across countless edits. Hashtag Tuberville exposed shot to the top of trending, followed closely by hashtag Crockett receipts and hashtag Truth over Arrogance. TikTok was flooded with memes. One clip showed Crockett calmly pressing play, freeze-framed with flames erupting behind her, captioned, "When you drop the receipts at the perfect time." Another edit stitched Tuberville's laugh before the reveal to a record scratch. Well, that didn't age well. On Instagram, Reels racked up millions of views within hours. Some paired the recording with courtroom drama music, turning the confrontation into a mini-movie. Others cut it with reaction shots of crowds gasping, judges slamming gavels, or even sports announcers shouting, "Down goes Tuberville." But it wasn't just memes. Commentators piled in almost instantly. Political analysts replayed the moment frame by frame on cable news. Some marveled at Crockett's composure. Notice how she doesn't raise her voice, doesn't interrupt, doesn't gloat, she just lets the truth do the work. Others skewered Tuberville. This wasn't just a bad look. This was arrogance collapsing in real time. Celebrities joined the chorus. A-list actors retweeted the clip with captions like, "This is how you handle bullies." Musicians remixed Tuberville's lines into viral tracks. Comedians turned the audio into stand-up bits overnight. Even veteran organizations weighed in, condemning the senator's dismissive remarks about service members and praising Crockett's defense of dignity. Supporters flooded Crockett's pages with messages of encouragement. "You didn't just win the debate, you won the moment. Thank you for standing up for us. Finally, someone with courage and receipts." Her follower count skyrocketed. Small-town Americans, veterans, students, immigrants, voices from every corner of the country, posted their own stories under the hashtag Truth over Arrogance, turning the viral moment into a broader movement. Meanwhile, Tuberville's camp scrambled. His press team released a hasty statement claiming the audio was misinterpreted and taken out of context. But the internet wasn't buying it. Fact-checkers quickly confirmed the recording's authenticity. News outlets replayed it side by side with footage from his fundraiser. The damage was irreversible. The ripple effects were enormous. Talk shows opened with segments on the clash. Political podcasts devoted entire episodes to analyzing its significance. Editorial headlines blared, "Crockett crushes Tuberville with calm precision, the power of poise in the age of outrage." And yet, beyond the laughter, beyond the memes, beyond the hashtags and late-night monologues, something deeper was brewing. For millions watching, this wasn't just entertainment, it was validation. A reminder that arrogance could be dismantled, that dignity could prevail. Parents showed the clip to their kids as an example of staying calm under pressure. Teachers brought it into classrooms as a lesson in rhetoric and resilience. Veterans shared it among their circles as proof that their service still had defenders in the halls of power. Immigrant communities reposted it as a reflection of their own struggles and triumphs against dismissal and disrespect. The moment had transcended politics. It had become cultural shorthand, a symbol of what happens when truth collides with entitlement. And just when it seemed like the wave had peaked, bigger conversations began to emerge. Commentators weren't just asking who won the debate, they were asking what this meant for America. Because beyond the memes, something deeper began. When the storm of reactions reached its peak, Crockett didn't rush to bask in the applause. She didn't post celebratory memes or gloat over Tuberville's humiliation. Instead, she stepped to a podium a few days later, the same composure in her voice that she carried in the heat of the confrontation, and offered something far more powerful: perspective. "Let's be clear," she said to a packed room with cameras clicking and live feeds streaming to millions. "This was never about me versus Senator Tuberville. This was about whether arrogance should silence dignity, whether privilege should bury truth. And I think America answered loud and clear." Her words landed with the weight of something bigger than politics. People weren't just hearing a politician defend herself, they were hearing a universal lesson, one they could carry into their own lives. Because every viewer who had ever been mocked for their identity, dismissed for their background, or talked over by someone with more power felt themselves reflected in that moment. Crockett framed the clash not as a personal victory but as a moral one. She reminded the country that leadership is not measured in insults or laughter at another's expense, but in how one stands tall in the face of it. "True power," she said, "isn't how loud you laugh at someone. It's how steady you remain when the laughter is aimed at you." Her speech drew on the struggles of veterans, immigrants, working-class families, and anyone who had been underestimated. She wove their stories into her own, transforming her mic drop into a rallying cry. "I carry with me the voices of those who were told they didn't belong, who were told they weren't enough. And I promise you, every time arrogance sneers, truth will answer." Commentators called it a masterclass in reframing the narrative. Rather than letting the confrontation define her, she had defined it herself. Dignity over arrogance, truth over privilege, resilience over ridicule. And it resonated. Parents clipped her words and shared them online with captions like, "This is the lesson I want my kids to learn." Veterans said, "She didn't just defend herself, she defended all of us." Students quoted her in essays. Churches, classrooms, and community groups replayed her remarks, not as a partisan message but as a human one. Even some critics admitted grudging respect. "You may not agree with her politics," one conservative commentator said, "but you can't deny she handled that moment with strength and grace. And frankly, we need more of that in American life." In reframing the clash, Crockett had turned a viral takedown into something more lasting. She had transformed fleeting internet drama into a story about who we are as a nation, and who we want to be. She closed her remarks with the kind of cadence that sticks in people's minds long after the live stream ends. "The lesson here isn't that one politician outsmarted another. The lesson is that dignity will always outlast arrogance. The truth will always outshine privilege. And when we choose to stand firm in our values, no amount of laughter can shake us." The room erupted, not with the roar of partisan cheers, but with the sound of people moved. People who understood they weren't just witnessing a political moment but a moral one. And that's why this story isn't just theirs, it's ours. And so, we return to the moment that started it all, the sneer, the laugh, the attempt to reduce dignity to a punchline. What Tuberville thought would be a show of strength became a cautionary tale. What Crockett turned it into was something far greater. A reminder that truth has a way of cutting through arrogance like lightning through the night. This wasn't just a clash between two people on a stage. It was a mirror held up to America. On one side, the entitlement of privilege, convinced that mocking someone's story could erase it. On the other, the quiet resilience of someone who carried more than her own name. She carried the weight of family sacrifice, of community pride, of a nation that still believes in dignity over cruelty. And in that balance, America saw itself. We saw the choice we face every day: To sneer or to stand tall, to laugh at the vulnerable or to listen to their truth? Crockett's answer was unshakable. And in standing firm, she gave voice to millions who've been waiting for someone to show that dignity is not weakness, it is power. That's why this story will outlive the trending hashtags. That's why it will echo beyond the memes. Because it's not just about her victory, it's about ours. So if you felt that fire, if you believe in choosing truth over arrogance, if you believe America needs more voices like Crockett's, don't just watch, join. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss the moments that matter. Backhand index pointing right. Share this video so the message of dignity spreads louder than any insult. Backhand index pointing right. Be part of the movement that says, arrogance falls, dignity rises. Because this isn't just her fight, it's yours, it's ours, it's America's.